Welcome to Torah Today Ministries. My name is Grant Luton.
And I'm Robin.
And we're here to discuss the final two Torah portions of the book of Numbers, which are MatotMasei.
And if I'm correct, I believe Matot means the tribes.
Yes.
And Masei refers to the journeys.
The journeys, that's
and
right.
It is quite a description of the journeys that the people took all the way from the beginning of the story to where God was taking them at the end of the story.
42 journeys.
42
camps.
journeys.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. There's so much packed in here. And as we end up with these chapters in the book of Numbers, I hope we can do justice to these big topics.
Yes.
I don't, without the Lord's help, there's no way we can do justice. But
we never do justice to them.
Oh my goodness. Let's
if
jump in.
If we just spark people to study a little more and dig more on their own, then mission accomplished.
You know, I was giving thought to why we give so much time and attention to these 5 books in this ancient book of the Bible, because a lot of people around the world read the Bible, some more devotedly than others, some more haphazardly than others. But to return to these 5 books and to divide them up into portions and to pay so much attention to them week after week, year after year, I was in the book of Jeremiah again, Grant, and reminded of how the Lord said, stand by the ways and ask for the ancient paths where the good way is, and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. I see these books of Torah like his signposts.
Absolutely.
And guidance and inspiration and instruction for how to walk in the good way. And I think that to the extent we ignore it and disregard it, we compromise goodness in our lives.
Oh, we do.
We really do.
Well, people haven't been taught, they just haven't learned how to read the Torah. They read the stories and they find examples in the stories of Noah and the Ark and the Tower of Babel, and they find examples of righteousness versus unrighteousness. But when they come to the commandments and the laws, like in here in chapter 30,
or the
laws,
stories.
Well, the laws themselves, then everything falls apart. Well, I'm not under the law. That's all done away with. And, you know, sometimes I think, if God slaps his forehead, that's when he slaps his forehead, thinking, oh, these laws are what I've given you to show you what my heart is, to reveal my essence to you so you know me better. And if we look into the laws and the commandments and the stories and events and learn how to interpret them to show us more about who God is, it'll change the way we live life.
I want to know. I've always been the kind of person that I want to get as close as I can to the very best.
Yes.
And I don't like to settle for mediocrity.
Yeah.
And there's an ancient saying, in the way one is determined to go, he will be led.
Yeah.
And he, God eventually will get us all where he wants us to be.
That's right.
But we can make the journey meaningful
Right.
and rich with adventure and connection
Absolutely.
to him, or we can just wander aimlessly and keep bumping into walls and furniture and stubbing our toe or worse, and saying, where is the meaning to life?
Well, I think one of the most spiritual games that children play is the game of hide and seek. Mm-hmm. Because Isaiah says, you are a God who hides himself. And God tells us, I want you to seek my face. Mm-hmm. Hide and seek. That's the story of our lives.
But he says, if you seek me with your whole heart,
you'll find me.
You'll find me.
And Yeshua came to seek and to save those which are lost. And now he says, now you're it. I'm hiding. Come find me. And the way we find God, the way we seek him, is not by traveling to the top of a mountain or going to a monastery. We go into the Word. He's hidden here in these ancient words. And I know the Torah portions begin in chapter 30, but let's just, if you don't mind, let's just go to chapter 31.
Sure.
Here's this war with Midian. And we can look at this and how Israel was commanded to go and fight Midian. These are the people sent by Balaam and Balak to seduce Israel and cause such disaster.
And we can think, well, those what does that have to do with me? That was thousands and thousands of years ago, and we don't even go into war like that anymore.
Yeah, and that which is true. But the thing is, the moment you find out what the name, the word Midian means, the portion opens up.
Yeah, then it really relates.
And the word Midian means, it can mean contention, strife, and judging.
Yeah.
And
pretty
we
relevant.
all should be waging war against those things.
Strife, contention, and judging.
That is what destroyed. Midian came in and destroyed many in Israel. Thousands died because of the seduction of Midian.
Right.
And to be contentious, to judge, to enter into strife is a more powerful temptation than any of us want to acknowledge.
Well, the insidious attack was that the Midianites infiltrated the people of God, and suddenly they were contentious with one another. And striving with one another, and it weakened them.
And if you remember from last week, what finally brought this terrible plague to an end is when Phinehas came in with a spear and he ran the spear through Zemri and Cosby. Zemri was a Jew, Cosby was a Midianite woman. Zemri means my song, Cosby means my deception, my lie. And when we enter into contention and strife and judging and backbiting and gossip, because we really sense we're superior, we have it right and they have it wrong, and we begin to attack, we have lost our song. The music stops. We've attached ourselves to a lie, because the Master tells us, don't do that. Be careful. Don't be condemning people. Don't be judging people. And so when we read about this war, how merciless it was against Midian, we begin to see how serious God is in us waging war against our tendency to be contentious and judgmental.
Yeah. Well, even divided in our own self. I think that is the way the enemy gets in and breaks down the strength of God's people is by dividing us even in our own souls, and we start to doubt, and one part of our soul argues with the other part of our soul, and we're not united anymore. So at the beginning of every war, God's people would sound the trumpet, wouldn't they?
Yeah. Well, think about it for a moment. What is one of Satan's titles? The accuser of the brethren. And yet I see brethren accusing brethren all the time.
Or we accuse ourselves.
Well, but the thing is, whose side are you aligning with when you begin to be contentious and accusative towards others? You're aligning yourself with Satan. Right. I call these believers Satan's little helpers, because he's the accuser of the brethren, and they come alongside to help accuse their brothers and sisters right along with him. And they have aligned themselves with Satan, while in their own minds they think they're doing the Lord's work. I'm bringing correction. I'm showing error. And I'm condemning sin in other people. And Satan is right behind them applauding their efforts.
Well, I mentioned the blowing of the trumpets, and I believe that that's really significant, because when all the people would hear that trumpet blown, suddenly they were all hearing the same thing. They were called to battle. They all knew what the purpose was, and they were united.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the reasons I love the fall feasts, when we gather for Rosh Hashanah and we hear that trumpet blown. It's like a call to reunite us with his heart and stop being double-minded and reunite with the people around us and remember our purpose here and the direction we're going, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I remember when I taught on this portion a few years ago, about 4 years ago, I had just read a book called Positivity Bias. It's by Mendel Kalmanson. I think he's a rabbi, I'm not sure. But Positivity Bias, it was a real game changer for me because it's so easy. We're wired to find fault, to see an error. And some people pride themselves on seeing imperfections. And they have a sense of superiority. Well, I just know better because I can see an imperfection. But how many of us are good at catching people being good? Seeing the good that people do, seeing what is right. I mean, okay, good for you. You can hear the one wrong note somebody hits. Are you able to hear the thousands of right ones that they hit? Can you enjoy the music of the right notes? I saw this little short video in a news clip, and they were taking a good man, someone I admire, but they had found little stupid, indiscreet things he had said in casual remarks, and somebody recorded them and strung these together to say, look what this guy really is. And I started thinking, man, if somebody started playing Grant Luton's blooper reel of all the stupid stuff I've said, I would just have to dig a hole and crawl into it. And so I want to ask our listeners, do you want to be judged by the dumb stuff you've said? Mm-hmm. Or do you want to be judged and weighed based on the righteous things you've done and what you've aimed your life at accomplishing? Or you just want to be judged by your mistakes?
That's why we're commanded to consider all of others favorably.
Yes.
Consider your brother favorably. Yes. And sometimes we are wired to think that if we see a legitimate negative thing, because it's legitimate, it's worth magnifying and focusing on. And it feeds our ego somehow, and it divides. But wow, we skipped the whole chapter 30. Can we skip? Let's go back.
Let's go forward.
You don't want to talk about vows?
I know.
Okay.
I want to move on.
Okay, we'll move on.
I'm sorry. We can come back. We can do a special parsing the portion just on vows if you want.
Let's go forward.
But I do want, I just feel so compelled just at this moment to share a quote or two from this book, because I think this might speak to the lives of some people who are listening right now. Here's one of the quotes. It is not the events of our lives that shape us, but the meanings we assign to those events. In other words, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Mm-hmm. And I know some people whose lives have been defined by some great evil that's been done to them. And they can never get past it. And they live in that memory and in that moment and in that pain and never move past it. But if we can learn to assign meaning to the event, then that event actually changes.
Right.
And as that well-known saying that we've heard many times, you do not see things as they are. You see things as you are.
Right.
And so the war with Midian is a very pertinent chapter for our lives, because we have to constantly maintain war against Amalek, which is the flesh, and against Midian, which is this tendency we have to be judgmental and contentious and to point out faults in people. We need to get victory in both of those areas.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that we went forward, because it's just an essential
it's so important.
thing
It's so
to
important.
know. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So, I have to confess, part of me is in a rush to get to chapter 32, because 32 is just,
let's go there.
To me, such a powerful
Reuben and
chapter.
God.
Reuben and Gad.
Reuben and Gad. So the context is, once again, the people have journeyed through the wilderness, and they're at the very edge of crossing over.
For the second time now.
Now, what happened the first time?
Well, the first time, the people got this bright idea, well, let's send some spies across to get a report and bring it back to us.
And they were negative.
Yeah.
Talk about negativity.
10 of the 12 spies brought back what God calls an evil report. They said, the land is great, but we can't conquer the people, and the cities are too hard to conquer. And they stirred up dissension and fear and whining, there was murmuring in the tents. And the people got so fearful, and fear causes anger. And they got so angry they were ready to stone Joshua and Caleb because Joshua and Caleb wanted to go on across. But their crossing the Jordan was delayed for 40 years. So now they're up here again. And Reuben and Gad don't want to go across. Now it's just 2 tribes. And Moses even tells them, this is what your fathers did. Moses got really angry with them. I mean, at this point, Moses is about 120 years old, and he's thinking, no, I don't want to spend another 40 years in the wilderness because they did the same stupid thing again.
Well, it seems to me that their primary concern was about finding safety and security for their animals and their livestock. Well, it keeps mentioning livestock.
Yeah. Well, let's start with verse 1. The children of Reuben and the children of Gad had abundant livestock, very great. They saw the land of Yazer and the land of Gilead, and behold, it was a place for livestock. The children of Gad and the children of Reuben came and said to Moses, to Eleazar the Cohen, and to the leaders of the assembly, saying, and then they named these places, Atarot, Dibon, Yazer, and Nimrah, and Heshbon, and so on. For the land that Adonai smote before the assembly of Israel, it is a land for livestock, and your servants have livestock. The assembly of Israel, it is a land of livestock, and your servants have livestock. I'm just thinking, yeah, but the land of Canaan is a land for people. It's for the children of God. It's for the children of Israel.
Yes.
But they were willing to sacrifice the land God had for them so they could have a land for their livestock.
So is it just a metaphor for accumulating stuff?
I think what it is, these people have come so far and they're right here at the goal. And this last thing that is keeping them crossing into the place of fruitfulness and victory into their inheritance is their materialism, their stuff.
I'm reminded that we're told it's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom.
That's right.
And Canaan represents kingdom life.
Yes.
But they're settling for just a place to continue to accumulate livestock.
Yes. And when Yeshua said that it's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, he wasn't saying rich people can't go to heaven. The kingdom of heaven is where God's will is done.
The abundant life.
You can't enter into a place where God's will is done. You can't enter a place of doing his will if you're tugging along or your materialism and worried about that.
Yeah.
That becomes a ball and chain around your ankle. And you just can't move forward into a life completely devoted to serving God, bringing his kingdom, if your materialism, your stuff, has your heart.
And what Reuben and Gad didn't only hold them back and cheat them out of walking all the way into their true potential, but it discouraged the others.
Oh, it did.
It really
so did.
discouraged their brothers, and even in the other tribes. They were discouraged.
Well, let's read the next few verses. Verse 5, they said, if we have found favor in your eyes, let this land be given to your servants as a heritage. Do not bring us across the Jordan. In other words, if we found favor in your eyes, do things our way.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Moses said to the children of Gad and children of Reuben, shall your brothers go out to battle while you settle here? Why do you discourage the heart of the children of Israel from crossing to the land that Adonai has given them? This is the worst thing. It's almost as if, okay, if you guys want to abdicate your inheritance, fine. But don't you dare discourage the hearts of those who want to follow God fully. Why do you dissuade the heart? And then look what he says in verse 8. This is what your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. They went up to the valley of Eshcol and saw the land, and they discouraged the heart of the children of Israel. not to come to the land that Adonai has given them.
Wow.
And it says, they have not followed me fully, in verse 11.
Now, am I correct in remembering that, fast forward, Reuben and Gad were the first two tribes to be taken into captivity?
That's exactly right. God gave them their request.
Yeah.
He let them settle on the wrong side of the Jordan. And as a result of that, the tribe of Manasseh is torn in half. You don't see Manasseh in this argument. But after Reuben and Gad get their inheritance on the east side of Jordan instead of in the land of Canaan, Manasseh started thinking, you know what, we've got a lot of livestock too. And the tribe of Manasseh was torn in half. It damaged the people of God. So over in 1 Chronicles 5:26, when we fast forward, it says, so the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Assyria, even the spirit of Tilgat-Pilneser, king of Assyria, and he carried them away into exile, namely the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and brought them to, and then it names the cities, and it says, brought them there to this day. They never recovered.
Well, this piggybacks on our discussion of the war with Midian, because it was strife, contention, negativity that caused this entire breakdown. It's fascinating. There's a proverb, 20:21, and it states that an inheritance gained hurriedly is not going to be blessed in the end.
That's exactly right.
And this picture of Reuben and Gad saying, you know what, we're going to take what is ours now and settle for this land, even though God has said there's a better way to live.
That's right.
And
That's
look
right.
what happens.
Yeah.
And then they discourage their brothers around them.
Yeah. Well, you know, when it comes to a contract or an agreement with people, you can compromise. Well, okay, I'll invest this, you invest that. You compromise, it becomes a win-win situation. You don't compromise with God. When you compromise with God, you lose. Because God's will is the best. It's perfect and has our best interest at heart. When we compromise with that, we damage ourselves. You know, over Psalm 106 is a long psalm, and it's kind of a catalog of Israel's failures. And it talks about their failures in the wilderness. And when it discusses the quail, they hungered for quail.
Yeah,
and there's that well-known verse. So he gave them their request, but sent leanness to their souls. What it really says, he gave them their request, but sent a wasting disease among them.
Oh, man.
Now, what's interesting, a person's will is his ratzon. Ratzon is the word for will. But the word for wasting disease is razon. It sounds almost the same. And so many times God will say, okay, this is what you want. I'll give you your ratzon. I'll let you have your will. But you're going to experience razon, a wasting disease, something that's going to diminish your life because you compromise with my perfect will.
Well, at the beginning of our discussion today, I quoted that ancient saying that in the way one is determined to go, he will be led. And I don't want to settle.
That's right.
I want to know that I'm doing my best. And to also go back to our conversation at the beginning, when I said, why is it that we're spending all this time and energy discussing the Torah? The word Torah itself is an archery term, isn't it?
Yes, yara, to hit the bullseye, hit the mark.
Hit the mark,
yeah.
The bullseye. And I mean, we can go out as an unskilled archer and just shoot all over the place, including each other accidentally or intentionally, whatever the case may be. But God calls us to a life where we get stronger and more skilled. And
That's
like
right.
our friend, the rabbi years ago who visited our home said, the farther you go back in terms of history and the foundations, the further you can go forward.
It's like drawing a bowstring. The further back I pull it, the
Exactly.
farther the arrow goes the other way. Yeah.
So when we look at these examples, as in Reuben and Gad and the war with Midian, it gives us the ability to get closer to hitting the mark for
Yes.
our own lives and,
right.
and finding God.
Yeah. And you know, I guess, Robin, this is why I was kind of pushing. I wanted to get to 32 because chapter 32 is the chapter that describes pretty much every single spiritual issue a believer can have.
Yeah.
And it always comes from not following God fully and wholeheartedly. And in these last days, I see more and more believers becoming very mediocre in their devotion to God, their time of study, prayer.
It's
Just
tempting.
it is. And it's like in these last days, my burden of my heart, I know yours too, is to encourage people to follow hard after God, to stay faithful, to be a Joshua, to be a Caleb. Don't compromise. Don't let your house and your stuff and your money hold you back from fully entering into the kingdom of God and doing His will here. And so it's just a burden, a passion of mine to encourage people to stand strong, be fearless, walk with God, conquer the enemies, cross that Jordan, and reach the goal that God has for you.
And in the meantime, all of us make our journey a little longer and a little harder than it has to be. And we can turn a few weeks' journey into 42 years. That's what we do. But God doesn't
Yes.
abandon us. He
Yeah.
sticks with us, and He makes all of those little encampments and
Yes.
journeys and detours meaningful to bring us back, because He seeks us
Right.
out.
And which is a great segue to chapter 33.
Right.
Yeah, chapter 33 is one of those chapters that generally you're just in a hurry to get through, because it just lists a bunch of journeys and encampments, 42 to be exact. And it was one of those chapters that I used to just say, oh, ho-hum, let's get on with something interesting. But a few years ago, I actually wrote like a devotional book called 40 Years at 42 Camps. And I know this is a shameless commercial plug, but you can find it on the Tour Today Ministries website
Well, it's
on
good.
Amazon.
It's all of those encampments have a very specific lesson
do.
for not only those people, but us people.
That's right. That's right. You know, we can't shorten the journey God has for each of us, but we sure can stretch it out. Because it was only an 11-day journey from Mount Sinai to the Jordan River. But they managed to stretch it out into 40 years because of the rebellions and so on.
Well, one of the things I noticed, and it made me smile, is that at the beginning of chapter 33 and verse 3, it describes Israel starting out boldly in the sight of all the Egyptians. And when they left slavery, they were bold, they were pumped, they were ready to go. And then they get into the wilderness after they crossed over, and they started to slow down and murmur and complain.
Yeah.
And they had to overcome all of these enemies that they encounter.
That's right. So true. You know, it's but it's amazing that as you go through these 42 camps, each one has a different name. The names of those camps teach us so much. And that's what I wrote this little book about. I take each camp name, describe what happened there, if we have any history of what happened there, and what the name means. And that really plots out kind of our spiritual slog through this world as we make our way to crossing into a place of victory. Now, interesting, why 42? Well, there were 42 encampments. The first one's in Egypt. It's in Ramesses. And then the last one is right the Jordan, and it mentions Jericho, which is across the Jordan, because that's...
So it's the promised land.
Yes. So in between these, the first and last encampment, you've got 40 journeys.
And that number 40 is always
40
important.
encampments, yes. So, and the number 40, the 40 encampments between the first and the last, is the transition. And wherever you see the number 40 in Scripture, reigning for 40 days, 40 nights, or Yeshua, 40 days in the wilderness being tested.
It was a transition time.
Always transition. It's almost like from the caterpillar to the butterfly.
Yeah.
And there's no... You just can't sidestep this.
Well, it's the metamorphosis that he ordains for our life.
It is. It is.
And if we cooperate with him and trust what he says is true, it can be shorter and less painful.
Yes. You can't shorten it more than that is ordained, but we can stretch it out. And so it's a fascinating chapter when you begin to look into the names of these locations. Where they are on the map makes no difference. I wouldn't try to map them out. We don't know where a lot of them are. But we're given the names. That much we're given. And if we're given the names, and each name means something specific, then that matters. It matters. It's pertinent to our own lives here in 2023.
Every detail matters.
Every detail.
And then our portion ends with a description of what it will be like over the Jordan, and God in his grace says, listen, things are going to happen even after all this. If there's an accidental killing and someone comes after you to take your life, because I value life so much, I'm going to provide places of refuge for you.
Yes.
And it's easy to forget that God is life. He calls us to life. He protects life, and he gives us a way to make the most of life. And that's what I see when I see the description of these places of refuge for his people.
Yeah. It's so unique. What other people has a history like this, where God gives them a land, brings a whole population into the land? He divides the land into their inheritance, into their portions. This is where you're going to live. But then scattered throughout the land are these priestly cities, these Levitical cities, that are cities of refuge. And according to the histories, there were signposts put up. So if you were fleeing, you accidentally killed someone, and their avenger is coming after you.
Yeah.
You want to get to one of these cities of refuge. And so the signpost would show you the shortest distance to the closest city of refuge. And so they put these on all the crossroads so you knew how to get there. And then when you got there, the avenger couldn't touch you until there was a trial. And if you were, and this is the interesting thing, if you were found like, okay, this was an accidental death you caused, we're not going to execute you, but you're not allowed to leave the city of refuge until the death of the high priest.
Yeah.
And that's just strange.
It is.
Until you think about, who's our high priest? Yeshua. And he's provided us a city of refuge, and we have to stay there until he dies. But he doesn't die.
And think of the thing that we're always fleeing. We're fleeing from the trouble that we create for ourselves.
Yeah.
But he says, come to me, all you who are weary, and I'll give you rest. I'll protect you.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It is. It's so amazing. Yeah, the verse I was referring to is in 35, verse 28.
Of Numbers.
Yeah, of Numbers, yeah. And God has provided us a city of refuge. Our city of refuge is not on this planet, though. Our city of refuge is the city that is coming. It's coming, the new Jerusalem that is coming. And so that's where we cling to our high priest, our Redeemer. So, well, you're pointing at your wrist, and that can only mean one thing. There's so much packed here.
Next week we start Deuteronomy.
We start Deuteronomy.
I confess, I do love the book of Deuteronomy especially.
I do, because it sums up the whole
talk about encouragement
story of from Exodus to the end.
I'm smiling as I think about it.
Yeah.
So we hope to meet all of you again then,
Yes.
as we begin this final book of the
Torah. So till then, we wish you shalom and may God bless.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you for joining us for today's teaching. If the work of Torah Today Ministries has touched your life, please consider making a donation or sponsoring an upcoming video. As a video sponsor, you'll have an exclusive opportunity to memorialize a family member, celebrate a special event, or simply support the ongoing creation of similar content. Your tax-deductible contribution helps ensure that our teachings continue to reach all who are longing for truth. Click the link or visit our website to learn more.